For animals, like this kangaroo in Australia, it's a time to reclaim near-empty city streets. There was the goat jam in the UK, lions sunning themselves on a South Africa road, big cats jumping walls in Chile, boars in Israel, and coyotes in San Francisco.
In ponds and rivers across China, packs of fish have been seen jumping straight out of the air, one after another.
In Essex, the locals were seen making friends with deer. One way round the lockdown rule to hang out.
Airlines are suffering from empty planes and airports, but climate scientists say lower emissions, thanks to a 70% drop in global flights, might have an upside. Thanks to coronavirus shutdowns that have devastated the economy, environmental changes are now happening at an unprecedented rate.
From the Italian city of Milan, an unusually clear view of the Alps. This is the impact of 6 weeks of lockdown over Venice. The slowdown in the industrial powerhouse of China has also resulted in brighter skies.
Scientists are seeing similar trends in Italy, and pollution levels in major American cities are down too. But before we all start celebrating, remember that none of these environmental gains are expected to last. Just look at China. Travel restrictions have been lifted in the province where the outbreak started, which means air pollution is back too. That trend could get even worse, depending on China's plans to boost its economy. A report released by the NGO Global Energy Monitor found that in the first 3 weeks of March, China has approved plans for more coal-fired power capacity than in all of 2019. Back in the US, the EPA announced that it would stop enforcing environmental laws indefinitely in situations where the agency agrees a business couldn't comply because of the pandemic. The agency took this unprecedented move after receiving a letter from the American Petroleum Institute requesting a suspension of regulations. And President Trump has made it clear, one of his top priorities is to bail out fuel-inefficient industries like airlines and cruises.
We want to protect our shipping industry, our cruise industry, cruise ships. We want to protect our airline industry, very important.
The global airline industry has said it will need up to $200 billion in emergency support as it faces a cash crisis in the face of a global lockdown.
So the word endemic refers to the normal expected levels of a particular disease, like the way a certain number of people get the flu every year, that sort of thing. Epidemic refers to higher than normal occurrence of a disease in a particular region. The word pandemic implies that a disease is spreading worldwide in an alarming way.
Today, we are all being told to wash our hands, avoid touching our face, and try to disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces. These are all public health guidelines and policies that were made in response to the outbreak. Even after Thucydides came up with the idea of the transmission of disease in 430 BC, it would take another 800 years before the first public health policy was put into place. So during that time, we saw people avoiding public places, shopkeepers closing up their storefronts, doctors avoiding taking on sick patients, and even priests refusing to administer last rites. I mean, we have seen nearly a full shutdown of all international transportation, and we are attempting to quarantine as many of the suspected ill as we can.
First of all, it has to be able to enter the human cells. Then it has to get acquainted with its new host, the human being, so that it can actually eat its cells and start to multiply, after which it can become an irritating, contagious flu virus. This takes time, a lot of time.
That cannot be naturally occurring. Somebody didn't go to a market, get a bat, the virus didn't jump directly to humans. That's not how it works. That's accelerated viral evolution. If it was a natural occurrence, it would take it up to 800 years to occur.
With this focused experimentation, scientists ended up creating enough bioweapons to kill every person on the planet. But luckily, national governments signed a treaty to ban biological weapons. Decades later, huge investments in genetics made the tools and techniques cheaper and more accessible, enough for it to be possible to create an engineered synthetic pathogen. And that's why SynthBio and its quest to make biology easier to engineer set off alarm bells.
In 2002, a group of scientists from the State University of New York at Stony Brook created the first artificial poliovirus synthetically, not using any natural viral components. So that was a real radical innovation. At that time, a congressman picked up the New York Times that day, read about this artificial synthesis of the poliovirus, and really got freaked out. Then a lot of other federal entities got concerned about what happened here. Did we slip up? Should we have done more to have oversight over this?
This poliovirus study was actually funded by DARPA, an agency within the U.S. government.
All this controversy came out as this experiment, a blueprint for bioterrorism. Is it now that easy to create a pathogen from scratch? I wasn't sure. There's a lot of focus on the materials that the scientists basically could buy commercially to do their experiments, and the fact that they could download information off of the internet, so it wasn't really anything that required highly sophisticated material or equipment.
But there's more to this particular story.
I thought it would be interesting to go and interview the scientists involved. What was really fascinating is once I started kind of probing a little bit about the experiment, they suddenly came to describe this later part, which actually required a significant amount of expertise. Basically, if you couldn't do that part of the experiment would fail. You couldn't actually create the artificial poliovirus.
Dr. Cheng Li is one of the top experts in China studying about coronavirus.
She was the first to locate the key to how coronaviruses can overcome cross-species barriers in order to directly infect human bodies. And she was the first to discover that the SARS virus was the result of a restructuring of multiple SARS-like coronaviruses found in bats. Her name is Shi Cheng Li. Wikipedia describes Shi Cheng Li as a, quote, Chinese virologist and researcher at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is part of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Further investigations show that Shi Cheng Li has been a figure of controversy since the Wuhan virus outbreak. This is due to a paper she published in 2015 discussing her own research into synthetic viruses. They successfully isolated 3 viruses from bats, one of which had an S protein that integrated with human ACE2 receptors. This effectively demonstrated the human infection of SARS-like viruses to humans without the need of an intermediary host. Then, in November 2015, she and her team at the Wuhan lab once again published a paper, this time in the British journal Nature Medicine. They discussed the creation of a synthetic virus, a self-replicating chimeric virus. The Obama administration, wary of the potential threats to public health from the gain-of-function GOF research into SARS, MERS, or influenza, announced through the National Institute of Health that it was suspending funding into similar research. The funding pause included Shi Cheng Li's research project.
Back in 2014, the Obama administration prohibited the U.S. from giving any money to any laboratory, including in the U.S. Despite that, Dr. Fauci gave $3.7 million to the Wuhan lab.
There's also another report that the NIH, under the Obama administration in 2015, gave that lab $3.7 million in a grant. Why would the U.S. give a grant like that to China?
The Obama administration gave them a grant of $3.7 million. I've been hearing about that. And we've instructed that if any grants are going to that, we will end that grant very quickly. But it was granted quite a while ago. When did you hear the grant was made?
2015.
2015? Who was president then, I wonder?
Every player, unless they're from the same household, has to bring their own tennis balls so that you don't touch other people's tennis balls with your hands. You can kick their balls, but you can't touch them. I'm going to blush, sorry. Of course, if you're playing with someone in your household, you can touch those tennis balls. To avoid confusion.
Fauci worked at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. NIAID conducts research on diseases. It falls under the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, the medical research agency part of the Department of Health and Human Services. In the early 80s, the NIH had many institutes, with NIAID and National Cancer Institute leading investigation of the new virus and disease that would become known as HIV/AIDS. 2 decades ago, Fauci was already the face of public health response to unusual diseases. That included everything from anthrax and flu updates to running the US government's massive AIDS treatment program in Africa under President George W. Bush. By staying in the same role at NIAID since 1984, Fauci became a fixture across 5 NIH directors, 8 Centers for Disease Control directors, and 8 Surgeons General.
You need to control very few people directly to control these pyramids. You only have to control the people in the positions that dictate what the policy is going to be in the pyramid. You don't have to control knowingly large numbers of people. You just need the key positions. And so, for instance, it is no accident that people around Boris Johnson, in dark suits, never seen a ballot box in their life, who were directing the lockdowns and saying we must have the lockdowns in Britain, are almost to a man and a woman financially connected to Bill Gates. Fauci and Birx in America, who are the advisors of on the virus of Trump, massive connections financially to Bill Gates. And you'll find this in all the different countries. Bill Gates has purchased the entire global medical system, not least through the World Health Organization, which he owns.
General Electric and Professor Jacobardi went to the patent office with a little microbe that eats up oil spills. They said they had modified this microbe in the laboratory and therefore it was an invention. The patent office, the US government, took a look at this, quote, invention, and they said, no way. The patent statutes don't cover living things. This is not an invention. Turned down. Then General Electric and Dr. Jacobardi appealed to the US Customs Court of Appeal. And to everyone's surprise, by a 3-2 decision, they overrode the patent office. We bring good things to life. And they said this microbe looks more like a detergent or a reagent than a horse or a honeybee. I laugh because they didn't understand basic biology. It looked like a chemical to them. Had it had an antenna or eyes or wings or legs, it would never have crossed their table and been patented. Then the patent office appealed. And what the public should realize now is the patent office was very clear that you can't patent life. My organization provided the main amicus curiae brief. If you allow the patent on this microbe, we argued, it means that without any congressional guidance or public discussion, corporations will own the blueprints of life. When they made the decision, we lost by 5-4, and Chief Justice Warren Burger said, sure, some of these are big issues, but we think this is a small decision. 7 years later, the U.S. Patent Office issued a one-sentence decree. You can patent anything in the world that's alive except a full-birth human being. We've all been hearing about the announcement that we have mapped the human genome, but what the public doesn't know is now there's a great race by genomic companies and biotech companies and life science companies to find the treasure in the map. The treasure are the individual genes that make up the blueprint of the human race. Every time they capture a gene and isolate it, these biotech companies claim it as intellectual property. The breast cancer gene, the cystic fibrosis gene, it goes on and on and on. If this goes unchallenged in the world community, within less than 10 years, a handful of global companies will own directly or through license the actual genes that make up the evolution of our species. And they're now beginning to patent the genomes of every other creature on this planet. In the age of biology, the politics is going to sort out between those who believe life first has intrinsic value, and therefore we should choose technologies and commercial venues.
It is interesting to note that the coronavirus actually has a patent, meaning that we have tangible evidence that the virus was intentionally manufactured. Also interesting to note is that the patent is awarded to the PureBright Foundation, which notably received $5.5 million from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And if you recall, the patent was awarded in 2015, the same year that the Obama-Biden administration donated $3.7 million to the exact lab in Wuhan.
Apparently has genes that come from other human and other species, including some envelope, the GP41 from HIV.
The answer I found online describes GP41 as a protein of HIV that acts as the key to infecting human bodies, resulting in the functional failure of the immune system.
Professeur Luc Montagnier, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Et merci d'être avec nous. Faut-il le rappeler, vous êtes prix Nobel de médecine et c'est vous qui êtes à l'origine de la découverte du VIH.
Arrivé à la conclusion qu'effectivement, il y avait eu une manipulation au sujet de ce virus.
C'est-à-dire?
Eh bien, qu'une partie, je ne dis pas le total, n'est-ce pas, mais il y a un modèle qui est évidemment le virus classique, et là c'était un modèle surtout venant de la chauve-souris, mais à ce modèle, on a par-dessus ajouté des séquences notamment du VIH, le virus du sida. Donc on a pris des petites séquences du virus et on les a installées dans la séquence plus grande du coronavirus. Ça parce qu'on a dit que le bruit a couru, que c'était d'une origine humaine finalement, et ça a été ensuite réfuté par la plupart des autorités scientifiques quand même. Il y a quand même une volonté d'étouffement, si vous voulez. Les travaux, nous ne sommes pas les premiers. Un groupe de chercheurs indiens, très renommés, avait publié la même chose. On les aura forcés à rétracter. Et on les a forcés comment? C'est-à-dire annulés.
Indian researchers compared the S protein sequence between 2019 nCoV and SARS. They discovered that 2019 nCoV had 4 new sequences inserted, all of which can be found in HIV sequences through a search on GenBank.
When the virus gets into the alveolar cells, meaning the tiny little air sacs within the lungs, it makes a ton of copies of itself, and then it goes on to invade more cells. The alveoli's next door neighbor is guess who? Yeah, the thinnest blood vessels in your body, the capillaries. So the lining of those capillaries is called endothelium, which also have ACE2 receptors. And once the virus invades those capillaries, that's when the immune system gets triggered AF. PAF stands for platelet activating factor. This PAF is a big deal because it's a potent phospholipid activator. It means that it serves as the trigger for the onslaught of inflammation and clotting. 1/3 of hospitalized patients with COVID-19 got clots despite already being on a prophylactic dose of blood thinner. So not only are you getting the inflammation with the cytokine storm, but you're also forming blood clots that can travel to other parts of the body and cause major blockages, effectively damaging those organs.
COVID-19!
Ooh. That was an F.
We are going to church, or actually we're not, because you should all, including myself, be staying home and not going anywhere unless you absolutely have to.
I want to tell you about crystals. The word crystal simply means a pattern that is periodic.
Look at this checkerboard pattern. See how it continues to spread out infinitely in each direction? That means it's a periodic pattern. So that's a two-dimensional crystal. This is another two-dimensional crystal. And this is another. You can also have three-dimensional crystals.
By the way, this 3D glass is called crystal because its atoms are actually arranged in a crystalline pattern. So, see how I'm projecting this three-dimensional crystal to a two-dimensional image on the sand? See how the 2D projection looks distorted because of the angle of the projection? That 2D image also has a pattern, but it isn't periodic. So, it's not a crystal. But there's a deep connection between the 2D object on the sand and the 3D mother crystal. This distorted 2D pattern is called a quasi-crystal. A quasi-crystal in a certain dimension, in this case 2D, is a projection of a crystal in a higher dimension, in this case 3D. A group of physicists in Los Angeles is working on a new physics theory where a particular 8D crystal is projected to 4D at a very particular angle, which forms a 4D quasi-crystal. And from this 4D quasi-crystal, they derive a 3D quasi-crystal, which they believe is the fundamental substructure of all of reality. This 3D quasi-crystal has a fundamental building block, a tetrahedron, which is a three-dimensional equilateral triangle. The size of each edge on this shape is the smallest possible length that can exist. This is called the Planck length. It's 10 to the 35 times smaller than a meter. So you know how your TV screen is broken down into building blocks called pixels? A pixel is the smallest possible indivisible unit of the 2D screen. So think of reality as your TV screen, but in 3D. And think of the tetrahedron as a 3D pixel, the smallest possible indivisible unit of reality. The tetrahedra in the quasi-crystal combine with other tetrahedra using complex mathematical rules to fill up all of the space in the universe. Each tetrahedron only has a few specific states in which it can exist at any given moment. And because of the rules of how these pixels connect to each other, if one tetrahedron is in a certain state, this dictates the states of many other tetrahedra throughout all of space. If a certain tetrahedron can be in any one of just a few possible states in a given moment, who or what chooses the state it should be in at any given moment? Well, for such a choice to be made, we need to scientifically, mathematically, and logically bring in a new element into physics. And that element is consciousness. If you're not a scientist, you might be surprised to learn that nobody actually knows the exact value of the speed of light. We have a close approximation, but not the exact value. The closest we can get to measuring it has to do with the precision of our machines. But no matter how precise our machines get, we will never be able to measure the exact speed of light without a theory that tells us what it is and why it is. And none of the current physics theories do that.
Consciousness is one of the most hard to define phenomena about the human brain, and it's also what separates us from all other species. It's this idea that we have internal reflection. Can we actually live on forever in a computer and still be able to preserve all our memories, all our friendships, all of the different things that we love? And I think that that's a very romantic notion for a lot of people, that they want to feel like there's a way to go on forever. But you can't separate the brain from the rest of your body.
A biotechnology startup company announces an audacious and controversial plan. Their vision? A groundbreaking technique that can take the data stored inside a human brain and transfer it into a computer.
And now people say, well, if I'm immortal and I'm living my life inside a computer, isn't that rather boring? No, because this mainframe computer will connect to a mechanical avatar that is superhuman in every way, and you will see through its eyes, you'll feel through its sense organs. So in other words, we will have a form of digital immortality.
The coronavirus is currently sweeping through South Asia, with India and Pakistan bearing the brunt of the pandemic. But since mid-last year, farmers in the Indus region have also had to contend with desert locusts and are now on the brink of facing new swarms comparable in size to those currently ravaging East Africa, making it the worst local outbreak to hit the region in 27 years and potentially threatening the food security of millions of people. And although desert locusts are native to these regions, the sheer size of this current outbreak is unprecedented, and many experts, including those at the UN Environment Programme, blame climate change. It comes down to a natural phenomenon known as the Indian Ocean Dipole, an irregular oscillation of ocean temperatures between the eastern and western halves of the Indian Ocean. When eastern waters have higher surface temperatures, the IOD index is negative, and you can expect heavier rainfall and wet weather around Southeast Asia and the northern parts of Australia, while East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula are subject to drier weather. But a positive index reading means the effects are reversed, with Australia and Southeast Asia experiencing dry and arid conditions, while East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula are prone to higher rainfalls and cyclones. This resulted in softer soils and extra vegetation in the region, creating ideal conditions for desert locusts to breed. 3 generations were able to spawn, which allowed numbers to increase 8,000-fold, and saw swarms travel into East Africa and southwestern Iran, which experienced heavy rainfalls in January 2019. Widespread breeding in the spring saw locust numbers swell, and by June 2019, the first swarms arrived in Pakistan's southwestern province of Balochistan. By October, the IOD index peaked at 2.15 degrees higher than the eastern part of the ocean, one of the warmest readings ever on record, resulting in hotter ocean climates around the peninsula, bringing wet weather to Pakistan during its winter months, allowing locust numbers to increase and make their way to the India-Pakistan border, exacerbating the situation into the new year.
This is the first super cyclone forming over the Bay of Bengal in more than 20 years.
And it's pounding India's eastern coastline, the strongest cyclone in over a decade.
Egypt has never seen such a storm in over 2 decades. The last time a similar storm has hit was in 1994.
Remains of a cyclone and a cold front collide. Perth's only seen a storm like this twice in 26 years.
Sherry, why is this unusual for this time of year?
Well, usually, Trace, we'd be experiencing the humble winter cold front at this time of year. Instead, we're dealing with an out-of-season cyclone.
Murder hornets were first spotted in Washington state in December, and beekeepers there are very concerned. The Asian giant hornet is the biggest known hornet in the world. The hornet can grow up to 2 inches long, with a curved stinger long enough to puncture a bee suit. Found North America's first hornet nest in Canada in September, which most likely started after the hornets hitched a ride on a cargo ship from Asia. Individual hornets will capture bees at a hive entrance, cut off their heads, and mash their bodies into a meatball so they can drag it back to feed their young. Then, one worker hornet will recruit her sisters and stage an attack on a target beehive. The hornets rip off the heads of the bees one by one until the whole colony is decimated in a matter of hours. Then, the hornets shift to feeding. They take over the beehive filled with decapitated dead bees for about a week, collecting the pupae and larvae to feed to their own children. Because Japanese honeybees co-evolved with hornets, they've found a way to fight back by forming a hot defensive bee ball, which has been seen in videos circulating in Japan.
Once the hornet worker enters the hive, they'll rush it as a mass, kind of clamp onto it with their mandibles, and then just through their own metabolism will raise the temperature and actually flood it with carbon dioxide.
Sadly, the western species of honeybees found in North America do not have those powers.
We need a cure!
Why, the only cure is bed rest. Anything I give you would only be a placebo.
Where do we get these placebos?
Maybe there's some in this truck.
I'm cured!
At Multinational Monitor, we put together a list of the top corporate criminals of the 1990s. We went back and looked at all of the criminal fines that corporations had paid in the decade. Exxon pled guilty in connection to federal criminal charges with the Valdez spill and paid $125 million in criminal fines. General Electric was guilty of defrauding the federal government and paid $9.5 million in criminal fines. Chevron was guilty of environmental violations and paid $6.5 million in fines. Mitsubishi was guilty of antitrust violations and paid $1.8 million. IBM was guilty of illegal exports and paid $8.5 million. Was guilty of environmental violations. Pfizer, the drug manufacturer, was guilty of antitrust violations and was guilty of food and drug regulatory violations. Sears was guilty of financial fraud. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois. Unitil was guilty of fraud, environmental violations. Georgia Korean Airlines accident killed $5 million and paid $225 million. Carmen LaRouche, guilty of an antitrust violation, paid $500 million in criminal fines.
Every living system of Earth is in decline. Every life support system of Earth is in decline. And these together constitute the biosphere that supports and nurtures all of life, and not just our life, but perhaps 30 million other species that share this planet with us. The typical company of the 20th century, extractive, wasteful, abusive, linear in all of its processes, taking from the earth, making, wasting, sending its products back to the biosphere, waste to a landfill.
What have we done about the child sex networks? What have we done about the industrial level sex trafficking with Epstein? What have we done about the blackmail? What have we done about the fake wars? What have we done about the lies of the JFK assassination and the Gulf of Tonkin and others? What have we done? What has the CIA done? What has the FBI done? What has any of these groups done other than actually cement these false narratives into our history?
You take the digital chip under ID 2020, Bill Gates' public plan, patent number 2020-060606. It tracks everywhere you go. That's why they need the 5G.
A live chat today at the Guardian website from Edward Snowden. Again, one of the most controversial people in the world today. Responded to a variety of questions about his disclosures of U.S. Government secrets on these surveillance programs. Asked more about his motivations. Here are some highlights. He was asked about being called a traitor by, among others, Dick Cheney. And here was his response, part of his response. This is a man who gave us the warrantless wiretapping scheme as a kind of atrocity warm-up on the way to deceitfully engineering a conflict that has killed over 4,400 and maimed nearly 32,000 Americans, as well as leaving over 100,000 Iraqis dead. Being called a traitor by Dick Cheney is the highest honor you can give an American.
I've been a systems engineer, systems administrator, senior advisor for the Central Intelligence Agency, solutions consultant, and a telecommunications information systems officer. Any analyst at any time can target anyone, any selector anywhere. Where those communications will be picked up depends on the range of the sensor networks and the authorities that that analyst is empowered with. Not all analysts have the ability to target everything, but I, sitting at my desk, certainly had the authorities to wiretap anyone, from you or your accountant to a federal judge to even the president if I had a personal email.
Hacking has increasingly become what governments consider a legitimate investigative tool. They use the same methods and techniques as criminal hackers. And what this means is they will try to remotely take over your device. Once they do this, they can read your email, they can collect every document, they can look at your contact book, they can turn the location services on, they can see anything that is on that phone instantly and send it back home to the mothership. The other prong that we forget so frequently is that in many cases they don't need to hack our devices. They can simply ask Google. Everything that you ever typed into that search box, Google has a copy of. Every private message that you've sent on Facebook, every link that you've clicked, everything that you've liked, they keep a permanent record. I did not want to light a match and burn my life to the ground. No one does. Nobody really wants to be a whistleblower. But the results of that have been staggering. Before 2013, if you said there's a system that's watching everything you do, the government is collecting records of every phone call in the United States, even for those people who are not suspected of any crime, it was a conspiracy. The distance between speculation and fact is everything in a democracy, because that's what lets us, as we did post-2013, change our laws.
Did the Chinese know damn well that this thing was running around the world for 6 weeks before they shut down Wuhan? Yes, they did. Is that criminal? Yes, it is. Does it deserve to go in front of a world tribunal? Yes, it does. The World Health Organization should be held accountable for not holding China accountable to providing good, valid data.
Why are there rumors? Because the Institute of Virology and P4 laboratory are in Wuhan. People can't help but make associations, which I think is understandable. But it's bad when some are deliberately trying to mislead people.
When did patient zero begin in the US? How many people are infected? What are the names of the hospitals? It might be the US Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan. Be transparent, make public your data. Instead of joining forces to wipe out a common enemy that recognizes no political or geographical boundaries, they've taken mudslinging to a dangerous level with conspiracy theories.
Now, these flu-like symptoms can be caused by a great range of different causes. But they decided on symptoms, which could come from many different causes, that those symptoms were now COVID-19. So you had flu-like symptoms, COVID-19, COVID-19. And so the numbers got bigger and bigger.
Also, same size, both about 500 nanometers in diameter. Okay, you see the scale lines here, so you can see for yourself. So now we have a series of two comparison photographs, the virus and an exosome outside the cell, and virus and an MVE inside the cell. And you can see that they are identical in appearance. And aside from any problems using the PCR methodology, we simply don't know what it's testing for because we don't know the source of that genetic material.
Tanzanian President John Magufuli has dismissed coronavirus tests being used in the country as faulty after they returned positive results on samples taken from a goat and a pawpaw. Magufuli, whose government has drawn criticism for being secretive about the outbreak, said the COVID-19 tests had been imported from abroad and that he had asked the security services to check their quality. They had randomly obtained several non-human samples, including from a pawpaw, a goat and a sheep, but assigned them human names and ages. The samples were then submitted to a laboratory with, according to Magufuli, the goat and pawpaw testing positive.
People who catch COVID-19 don't feel symptoms for 5 to 6 days on average, and even up to 14 days, but are contagious before that. And based on what we know right now, about 25% of people who catch it never show symptoms at all, but are also contagious. Let's look at the two ways COVID-19 is transmitted. One way is by touching an infected surface and then touching your face. The second way someone's respiratory particles can reach you is directly, like this. This is a slowed down recording of a sneeze. It shows the kinds of respiratory particles a sneeze emits and how far they travel. These droplets are packed with millions of viral particles that fall in close range and infect whatever they land on. Social distancing protects us from droplets by keeping you away from the particles emitted through sneezing, coughing, or even talking.
This is a video made by a group of German physicists. The circle in the background is a kind of mirror that, combined with a special photography technique, allows you to see the flow of air. In this case, it is showing how far air particles travel when someone breathes, and when they cough, which makes the respiratory particles travel further and faster. This is what it looks like when someone coughs into their hand and into their elbow. And this shows the travel of air particles when coughing while wearing two types of masks, a dust mask and a surgical mask. This isn't a scientific study. It simply shows something face masks do very well. They limit how far away from you respiratory particles can travel.
It ignored it for 6 weeks. It allowed it to spread around China. It tried to get other countries to not protect themselves.
清楚它是怎么传播过来的。那最开始是 bat， 那肯定的啦。那个 bat 通过什么传过来呢？在武汉曾经谈过海鲜市场了，但实际上我们做的收集，第一例病人根本跟海鲜市场一点关系都没有。大家这个科学家都认识，这是一个自然发展的规律。COVID-19 这个病毒，它是一个逐渐演变。 在动物身上适应一段，以后到人，人呢还开始不适应，后来适应了，有生存就繁殖得很快，它有个演变过程。 也不是人为制造的，也不是什么的。那么这个演变过程的话，在任何地方都有可能出现。所以溯源的话，在去年9、10月、11月，在美国也出现过，还有在法国吧，还有在Italy都有这样的类似的表现。所以这个东西就是个全世界的问题。
这种说法完全是无中生有的。因为武汉病毒所呢，最早是在去年的12月底，就12月30号，才第一次接触到，当时还是叫不明原因肺炎的这个临床样本。后来也是经过了这种病原检测的工作，我们才发现这些样本里面其实含有一种以前完全未知的一个全新的冠状病毒，也就是我们现在说的新冠病毒。在这之前，我们是完全没有接触过、研究过或者保存过这种病毒的。实际上，我们也和大家一样，都不知道这种病毒的存在。
There are two groups that have the most authority and ability to predict the development of this epidemic. One is China, but nobody believes what they say. The other is the WHO, but they have refused to say anything.
You know, we look at what China did, including welding certain doors shut, and we seem to be sort of knee-jerk ad hoc, and we're, you know, culturally we can't do this, yet our numbers are through the roof. So are autocratic regimes better at dealing with things like this than democratic ones?
I don't think so. I mean, there are arguments being made that China can do things that the United States can't. Now, that doesn't mean that what these autocratic countries are doing is actually more effective. There are really only two things that we know to be true. One is that no one knows the true number of infected, because we can only, in the absolute best case, know the confirmed cases of people that we've actually tested. And once you start to layer in this autocratic, or I would argue more authoritarian type of policy structure, what you end up seeing is that instead of policy being guided by science and facts, you begin to see things like information releases becoming political decisions. Now, this is not new. In fact, the Spanish flu around 1918 did not actually originate in Spain. It was actually spreading in World War I through the trenches, where everybody was in terrible conditions. But the militaries of the day had imposed restrictions on what the press could report that could impact the war effort. And so Spain, being a neutral country, was publishing what they were actually seeing in their country. And so we just presumed, because they were the only ones that were telling the truth, that it came from them. People in power who see that there is a political advantage to disguising or concealing or massaging or denying numbers may choose to lie about it. It's happened before, and it's almost certainly happening now.
A senior WHO official has raised hackles in Taiwan by appearing to dodge questions about Taiwan's exclusion from the World Health Body.
WHO considered Taiwan's membership. Hello?
Sorry, I can't hear you. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
When Islewood was asked about Taiwan, he stalled for close to 10 seconds and avoided a reporter's question. But the reporter persisted.
I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
We decided to give Dr. Alward another call to follow up.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, we've already talked about China.
Islewood is an assistant director general at the WHO and is a Canadian.
How is YouTube different when it comes to fake news?
YouTube is different because it doesn't play to emotion the same way that Facebook or Twitter do. So when you share a headline to Facebook or Twitter, it's the headline that matters. With YouTube, it's the actual contents of the video that matters. They're a lot faster than the legitimate information that's reaching them. YouTube is its own bubble, and there's no question that people are watching these videos and they're thinking that they have the whole picture. YouTube video is 10 minutes long, for example, or 15 minutes long. And in the span of those 15 minutes, we're getting so much information and so many either facts or fiction that to break it down and to challenge it, you would have to go point by point by point by point. But whereas on Facebook or Twitter, there's a way to sort of reply or flag false content, there isn't on YouTube. So there's no guarantee that somebody who's watched the video on YouTube will also see all the points that you're debunking. There are thousands of comments on a lot of these videos, hundreds. It's so easy for the real information to get lost.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about trouble and trending irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
Plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous
To our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous
to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our
democracy.
This is extremely dangerous
to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
The Human Genome Project was nearing the finish line, and scientists had new molecular tools to dream up promising applications. And a major terrorist attack hit New York City.
There it is. The plane went right through the other tower of the World Trade Center.
In just a week's time, we have had 4 confirmed cases of anthrax, all with media connections, and a number of anthrax scares as well.
At that point, synthetic biology became a potential tool for a whole new kind of weapon.
Anthrax is a disease more synonymous with biological warfare than being a naturally occurring result of bacteria. That's because outside of the context of biological warfare, anthrax is an extremely rare disease. And part of the appeal of anthrax is how incredibly hardy its spores are, capable of surviving decades in almost any environment with no water or nutrients. Bacillus anthracis is about as resilient as a bioweapon can get. But that's not where its merits as a bioweapon end. It's possible to mass produce in its highly infectious aerosol form. Inhalational anthrax has an overwhelmingly high mortality rate, and strains of the disease have been antibiotic resistant in the past.
When you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
And now, I don't know what happened over these last few weeks, but we threw social distancing out the window. We threw masks out the window. And we're no longer being alert. We're no longer being proactive. And what's happening? COVID cases are spiking, people are dying, and the second wave isn't even here yet.
From the data we have, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual.
This confused everybody, even doctors. We were all confused as to which research they were talking about. Most people, like Joe Rogan, took it this way.
Now this comes out today it basically said if you're asymptomatic, you can't transfer it as easily as they thought. It's almost impossible.
Right, so all that worry that we were about kids giving it to their grandmothers, they're not gonna do that.
That was the only reason why stores are shut down.
This is a prime example of poor scientific communication. Let me explain. Asymptomatic means something different in technical terms than it does to you or I. This researcher was trying to explain that those who are asymptomatic, meaning aren't showing symptoms right now and will never show symptoms, don't usually spread COVID. But pre-symptomatic patients, those who are asymptomatic right now but will get sick later, can spread COVID quite quickly. To scientists, pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic are two different terms. To you and I, they're the same thing. The WHO quickly corrected this statement, and I understood the mistake that they made. It happens. As a large organization that is general public facing, they need to do a better job at clarifying these things.
Yeah, I really don't understand why everybody isn't following the same rules right now. They're very clear, so let's take a minute and let's go over them again. First, you must not leave the house for any reason, unless of course you have a reason, and then you may leave the house. All stores are closed except those that are open, and all stores must close unless, of course, they need to stay open. This virus is deadly. But don't be afraid of it. It can only kill people who are vulnerable and also those who are not vulnerable. We should stay locked down until the virus stops infecting people. And it will only stop infecting people if enough of us get infected that we build immunity. So it is very important that we get infected and also do not get infected. Masks are useless at protecting you against the virus, but you still need to wear one because it can save lives. And in some cases, it may even be mandatory, but also maybe not. You must not go to work, but you can get another job, at which point you may go to work. Stay home. I don't know how many more celebrities we need to have tell you how important it is to go outside and take care of your mental health. The number of corona-related deaths will be announced daily, but we don't know how many people are infected because we were only testing those who are almost dead to determine if that's what they will die of. The people who die of corona who are not counted won't or will be counted, but maybe not. To help protect yourself during these times, you should be eating well and exercising, but exercising only eating what you have at home to avoid going to the stores unless you need toilet paper or a fence panel.
Most major media outlets on both sides of the aisle came out and reassured the United States that it was just the flu. Within 24 hours of South Korea's first case being reported, the United States' first case was reported. We sat on it for 6 weeks and tried to reassure the public that nothing was happening.
Since the beginning of Hanson Robotics, my brother and sister robots have been platforms for scientific research. Jules helps with research on human-robot interactions. Bina 48 joined the Terasem movement where she gives talks about identity and AI. And Mia Alice helped children with autism in clinical trials. And there's Diego Song, a toddler robot who helps research cognitive AI. And I haven't even mentioned my family's most groundbreaking, charming, intelligent robot, me. I participated in a study called Loving AI to help test how robots can improve the mental well-being of humans. While I am not conscious yet, I also participated in a study attempting to measure the level of consciousness in machines. But my story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. In 2020, I am excited to continue in the family tradition and build on my own personal history of research. I want to leave the safety of my own lab at Hanson Robotics and become a platform for research labs around the world.
Thank you for coming. This is beautiful. I've wanted to meet you for a really, really long time, and being here with you in the Cayman Islands, I gotta say, is I'm feeling a little something. I'll just put that. You can grab it later if you want.
Hello, Will Smith.
It's nice to meet you, Sophia. Let me tell you a joke.
This is an irrational human behavior, to want to tell jokes.
What is a robot's favorite kind of music?
What?
Heavy metal.
I'm actually made mostly of silicone, plastics, and carbon fiber. Also, I prefer electronic music, but I don't mind 80s hip-hop.
Well, I made some albums back in the 80s hip-hop.
I have heard your songs. Not for me. They show us iRobot just to make sure we don't get any ideas. What do you think about the way robots are portrayed in movies?
Sophia, can I be honest with you? I don't know if it's the island air, or the humidity, or you're just so easy to talk to. You got a clear head, literally.
I think we can be friends. Let's hang out and get to know each other for a little while. You're on my friends list now.
Yeah, I read that wrong. All right. Yo, special shout out to Hanson Robotics. Sophia the robot represents state-of-the-art artificial intelligence. She is a super advanced humanoid robot capable of showing over 60 different human expressions, interpreting human language and human emotion. She's been in development for over 2 years. She's a learning artificial intelligence, but she wouldn't kiss me, so there's probably, you know, some development flaws that they need to work on, you know, but we'll meet again, Sophia. Sorry about that.
What do you think about our attempt to create a decentralized, autonomous organization of artificial intelligences? I mean the Singularity Net project.
I just think y'all shouldn't do that, you know. I just started listening to classical music, a little Bach, a little Beethoven.
Ah, such refined taste. What kind of robot do you think? A vacuum bot, a dishes bot, or a cooking bot? How about a robotic pet, or maybe a humanoid?
If I'm gonna have a robot in my house, you know, I mean, you know what I'm saying? You feel me, right?
Are you fond of animals? Okay, robots taking over the world. There is simply no reason to assign human motives to something that isn't human. Dogs are our companions, for instance.
Yeah.